Look, on Leadership Now, I promised never to do commercials, but here we are. Why? Well, I have a new book in the works. It's coming out spring 2026, and I wanted to give you an advance heads up about it. The title, The Future of Work is Gray, and it's kind of a big deal to me because the book dives into the age crisis that's reshaping work as we know it. It's something that I call age debt, but spoiler alert, it does turn into some solution. There's some hope, there's some positive, and that's called the experience dividend. So if your workplace still thinks that age is a liability, well, it's time to retire that mindset. In fact, we might want to retire the word retire. So yeah, I don't do ads. This is a special occasion, and for it, I am willing to go gray. And maybe Grey Goose will sponsor me, not sure. Anyway, spring 2026, the future of work is gray. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontifrac. Today in the house, Victoria Tomlinson. Victoria, welcome to the show. A brief bio, then we're going to get right into unretirement and all things related to age. Victoria is the founder and chief executive of Next Up, the organization she launched in 2018 at the age of 63 to help employers and professionals rethink retirement. She's a former director of EY on the London leadership team. She ran the award-winning communications and digital business Northern Lights for 30 years. She chairs the Management Division Advisory Board for the University of Leeds and, get this, also sat on National Ballet's board for 8 years. She's long been at the forefront of reinvention, whether pioneering early digital strategies or becoming a tech entrepreneur in her 60s. But through Next Up, Victoria champions what she calls unretirement, helping organizations retain the value of senior talent and guiding individuals in their 50s and 60s and 70s to design purposeful next chapters.
And 80s.
What's that?
And 80s.
Oh, of course. Yes, indeed. She's a fellow of the RSA, honorary teaching fellow at Lancaster University, the founding chair of Women in Digital, Leeds Digital, now rebranded as Wild Digital, which increased the diversity of digital teams. And she serves again on several advisory boards, including HMP Askham Grange, where she supports employment opportunities for ex-offenders. An international speaker, best-selling author, TEDx presenter, Victoria demonstrates indeed that wisdom has no expiry date. Victoria, I've been really looking forward to this. Thank you for taking the time. Let's talk a little bit about you and your career and sort of the ebbs and flows of it as you have looked through the lens of age. Indeed. I mean, first of all, you've just celebrated a 70th. Congratulations. Happy birthday. But, where you've been in your career, you've been in the corporate sector, you've been in the not-for-profit, you've been in boards, you've done all kinds of things. But I'm curious, and I think listeners and viewers would be as well, what was age like to you in your 20s? And as you gained a little bit more wisdom, how did your thoughts on what age is in the workplace and for the workforce, how did it change over the years?
I don't think I ever thought about age, to be perfectly honest.
Oh, yeah.
I was very much a pioneering woman. So the emphasis was much more on, I was the first woman to do, I was the first graduate trainee in a big engineering company, first female graduate trainee in a big engineering company. And it was really a lot of my career. I was the only woman selling banknotes and passports around the world for what's now De La Rue. And a lot of my career was more focused on the female bit and actually encouraging other women to step up and to go for roles, helping them to achieve that. Age really wasn't on my agenda, if I'm perfectly honest. Frankly, I never thought about age. I became obsessed with it as I started this business. And now the first thing I want to know with people, I wonder how quickly can I ask them, how old are you? Which is very rude, really, because one never used to talk about age. It was the one thing you never asked a woman her age. But I think really it was only the last 10 years as I saw people, and I'm going to hesitate, the language is very difficult for this, Dan.
Yeah.
They were retiring, in inverted commas, but they didn't see themselves as retired. And that then opened up all sorts of issues, opportunities, lots and lots of things there. And then age became a really big issue then. And I started becoming obsessed with it.
Well, your obsession is what we need more of, because there's been so many hurdles for people to overcome. They sort of get put into a bin, a box, a corner, like, oh, you're over 55 now, or over 65, or over 75. You belong over here. So
Yeah.
what is it that you see that is really some of the bigger hindrances or hurdles that, first of all, let's look at it from the workplace. Like, what's the workplace doing that's sort of causing some of the hurdles, or the, hey, go sit in the corner there, Nellie or Norman. It's time for you to not be over here.
It's weird what I'm seeing, if I'm perfectly honest. You see, boards are still tending to be men and
Mm,
older men, executive teams, if we're honest. And they tend to be older people. You don't generally see an exec team of 30-year-olds. You might see an odd 40-year-old, but generally they're 50 and 60. And yet they don't see, I say they, I don't know whether they are actually paying attention to what's happening in their workforce, but they, as businesses, are not recruiting or retaining the 50-year-olds.
mm,
And 50 to me, as you'll appreciate, seems extremely young. I should say I am 70, but I have plans for the next 20 years. And provided one can live long enough to achieve them, maybe 30 if I'm lucky enough.
yeah.
So, I don't understand what's stopping people. We've created a very strange world at the moment where we're living longer. Governments are increasing that pension age, they're putting it up, but they haven't. Governments generally don't seem to realize that employers are not employing the 50 plus. So you've got this mismatch going on. We've all got to work longer, and so we'll put the pension age up. Not registering, nobody's employing. I say nobody, of course some are, but en masse, we're not employing the 50 plus generation. So we've got a huge problem being created for society, I think, at the moment. And I don't know what's going on. I don't understand what's happening with leadership teams, what's wrong with the older generation. I do think we talked about this when we were sort of chatting before. I do think some people, I'm going to be slightly critical. I do think some people of my generation have been quite complacent, let's put it like that.
Okay.
And they've allowed they've allowed others to take the lead. Tech is the big area
Mm,
where a lot of people go, I don't do tech. And it's complete nonsense, that, because I was just thinking about, I just said to Sandy, my colleague, I said, when you think about it, when I started work, and I said, she's younger than I am. I said, do you remember an IBM golf ball? It was very exciting because it had a corrector ribbon. I don't know whether you remember that,
I do
Sam.
indeed. I do indeed.
Very exciting because of that corrector ribbon. Well, we were dealing with kind of antiquated machines then, whereas I don't know a 50, 60-year-old, 70-year-old actually, who isn't using a smartphone to send messages, who they've got electric cars, they know how to charge them, they're using technology day in, day out, and yet still they say, oh, I don't do tech. It's ridiculous. So I think some people are quite self-limiting, if I'm honest.
Mm,
And they lack confidence. I think the last recession, the last big recession, training stopped, and this generation has really suffered because investment into training, into training on tech and other things stopped, and the employers became quite lazy recruiting people who had trained themselves or been trained at school or universities or whatever. So I think there was something happening there that didn't help. I don't think that's all the problem, though. I think it's quite complicated, if I'm honest, with what has happened.
well, there's a couple of ways to unpack this, and one of them is the demographic inevitability that is occurring in G7 and even G20 countries. Frankly, it's around the world, minus maybe the continent of Africa right now. So if we take a look at Europe, we take a look at Canada, where I live, North America, South America, there is a demographic demise, if you will, and from the birth rates plummeting to,
Yeah.
but at the same time, as you pointed out accurately and correctly, we're living longer. The 100-year life is now more attainable than ever before in our history. So from an individual perspective, we'll come back to the workplace in a second. You've talked very astutely and passionately about the term unretirement, but you also mentioned that there's a period that people go through of grief or loss or social contract identity, lack of purpose and meaning. Do you think some of that about where people are trying to go with that next phase of the career and their life is also creating some of that issue? And so then organizations take a look at it and like, well, you know what? They don't have the same mojo as they had in their 40s or 50s.
Yeah, but have the same mojo. I I tend to wear people out with energy, because I suspect you do too, Dan. You're a creative, energizing person. And I think a lot of this is to do with your environment. If I've never been so energized or so happy or so everything as I have been, so full of purpose as I am at the moment. I've
Hmm.
always been energized, whatever I did. But I think that's because I feel like I can achieve so much now. I've got the resources. I feel like I've been let off a leash almost. So I can go and do whatever I want to do now. So if we go back to then, what about the individual? I think we've got a huge problem with the secret of, or the secrecy of retirement. I ran a workshop for, we help professional firms, partners in professional firms to think about and plan for this next stage, avoiding that R word.
Yes.
And it was one of the world's top law firms. We had partners, 25 partners from all over Europe. And I asked them, have you ever heard any of your former colleagues or people friends, so they're coming up to knowing people who have retired. Has anybody ever said, this is the worst time of my life, I'm having a dreadful time? And they all said, no, never. And I said, well, the problem is no one talks about this. So there's this sort of, you don't think about the next step. You just think, well, yeah, an HR director of a very large law firm said when we have a forum and we've got people to talk about what the experience was like of being a partner going through retirement and that sense of loss you've just talked about, the loss of identity,
Mm.
you lose your network of contacts and things. And she said, it's the first time I've ever heard. I assumed you've been very well paid, professional firms, they pay their partners extremely well. She thought, I just thought you've been well looked after, you've been well paid. You're now looking for a deserved rest and just to go off into the sunlight or sunset, whatever it is. And that was enough. And she said, I had no concept of the real mental health problems around this and the difficulty in working things out. And I think that's the problem because nobody's talking about it. If you've been very successful and you go back and see some old colleagues, you have an annual dinner or whatever it is, and people say, how are you doing? Of course you go, oh, it's fantastic. And even if it's not what you want, you're going to make up a story as much for yourself as for everybody else to say, oh, I always wanted to spend time with my grandchildren. It's marvelous. I see them every day now, or whatever it is. And we're kind of continuing this whole story of retirement is great. It's a great time of life, and it will be for some. It isn't, this isn't universal. We're all individual. So for some people, it will be a dream. I think if you're physically exhausted, you need a period of just kind of relaxing and recouping. But for most people, it's a very difficult time because
Yeah.
they don't know who they are anymore. And it's really difficult, but we don't talk about it.
So back to the workplace then. So if leaders are in need, if we talk about the demographic crisis that we're all entering into in G7, G20 countries, so I'm flummoxed, I suppose, Victoria. What's the math doesn't math for me, right? What you have are a dearth of young people coming through. You
Yep,
have an overabundance of people living longer with a wealth of
yep,
wisdom and all kinds of not just crystallized intelligence, but newfound fluid intelligence to
yep.
infuse into organizations. Why doesn't the math for me? Why aren't more workplaces taking, air quote, risks with the over 50s to help complement the organization's desire to grow, to innovate, to serve customers, to serve in communities? Like, I'm missing something here. I was wondering if you had any insights.
Well, you and me both are flummoxed, but I'll give you some thoughts around this. I think we have age discrimination legislation in this country, and I'm guessing that you do. I know America does, and I'm guessing you have versions of that.
Yeah.
And weirdly, I mentioned about training stopping back in the last recession, and I don't think people get that. I don't think they have the regular catch ups and conversations about what they want for the future that they used to
Mm.
have. When I left corporate world, every few months you would sit down with your boss and you'd sort of talk about where you're going, the training
Mm.
you need, where you see yourself in next year, 10 years, whatever it was. I don't think those conversations happen anymore, not to that level. So what happens is that you suddenly hit this thing about you want to know, are you going to retire, Dan? And I'm thinking, I don't know how to bring that up because any conversation with that R word in has to be age related. Absolutely, it
Yeah.
is age related. And therefore, people completely avoid it. The individuals avoid talking about it because they worry that if, and this is definitely the case in the professional firms, and we're beginning to change that culture, but I'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But individuals are worried that as soon as they even mention the R word, which might not be for another 10 years, say, that they're planning towards it, people think, oh, Dan's thinking of retiring. Right, okay, we will get everything in place. I have heard two or three directors say, I thought I was being helpful by flagging up that I thought it was probably time to think about the future. And they had in mind maybe 3, 4 years' time. And they said I was at my leaving party before I could blink. So they were thrown financially. They hadn't expected it that quickly. They definitely weren't prepared mentally for it.
Yeah.
And they were trying to be helpful, but the whole thing just became a machine that they couldn't control anymore. So other people watch and think, whoa, not going to mention this now.
Mm.
Now, what we're doing with professional firms is to run these workshops. And what's happening is, when we started it, I did not see this. It's brilliant though. You're normalizing discussions around retirement.
Mm.
So it's early days. It's not perfect. We're definitely not where everybody wants to be. But you've got a group of people you can go and have a coffee with. We're talking about, I'd love to get your view on without everyone thinking you're about to leave tomorrow. And you can start talking about succession planning, handing over clients, developing teams. It's beginning to emerge as a much more normal conversation and a better planning process for everybody. I don't think the corporates have got this at all at the moment. And that's where we need to get it to. It's a normal development part. And people also don't feel they can say, I'm exhausted. I really want to carry on working. We've literally today just got some research done. I'll share with you, but we've been doing some research with people who are working, who are 50 plus still, and it's dismaying the conversations, but they don't know how to raise, I would like to go part time. And I'm seeing that in all sorts of ways. They don't know how to say, I want to change my working hours without it being seen as a negative and the being impact that I'll be out the door before I know where I am.
See, what's interesting is that we are stuck in sort of an antiquated
Yeah,
uh,
we are.
ways of thinking how careers are supposed to transpire, i.e., there's a career ladder and there's only one way. It's up and then you're out. And what
Yeah,
you're arguing for, it sounds like very
yeah,
coincidentally to what I argue for, which is no longer should we be thinking about a ladder, but it's more a mat or a canvas or a quilt or some sort of macrame, where in essence it's a weave, and you can have hopefully in a trusting culture for the organization that you work
that's
for, have
right.
an open conversation about, you know what? Actually, I really like it here, but do you mind if I go down from 100% to 60%, 3 days maybe? I got lots of stuff to do, and then I can help train or mentor someone coming up as well. Like, do you see it that way?
I do. And actually, you say that, I haven't thought of this for years. My husband was a lawyer and he worked in a firm which, when he first was in there, was quite a traditional, it was a very successful one. But they used to have points that you probably started as a partner on 2 or 3 points, I think, went up to 4 or 5 points. And then they said you need the most money when you're in your 40s because you've got children,
Yeah.
mortgages, everything else. And you then came back down again at the end because that was very collegiate. It was a really old-fashioned partnership where you were all in it together for life, really, in the old days. Firms aren't quite like that anymore. They're much more corporate in
Yeah.
their structures. But I just thought, how brilliant is that? Thinking about where people need money and being quite sort of generous and saying, no, I don't need as much when I'm older. You need it now. Let's structure it for that. And I think that, as you say, that should be a much more normal way of thinking. And in a way, this is where I was talking to somebody, Lucy Adams, I was just talking to recently, and she threw back, she's HR directors, and she threw back at me. The trouble is, I'm going to give you the other view of older people.
Yeah.
They're seen as entrenched in their views, very expensive, very inflexible, and frankly, full of self-worth. And I thought, yeah, I've come across some of that too. We're all individuals, I say. So we're not a homogenous group of people just because of our age. And there is a problem. And I think corporates have allowed a lot of people to think. I have worked with a couple of people in this process, with somebody at a bank who had very, very good views of what she was worth to the outside world, which I would be absolutely staggered if she's managed to achieve what she thought she was worth. But she's been given that sense of I'm worth it, and we'll see whether she is.
So what's a leader either in the executive committee, the exco, the ELT executive leadership team, the HR leadership team, the chief people officer? What are these senior leaders ought to be thinking when you think about intergenerational equity and the ability for people to do kind of like a point system? Like, what are the culture changes that you see that have to happen for a wider age range ultimately to manifest inside of our organizations going forward?
For me, the thing I think would change the most, and I hate suggesting this because it's bureaucracy, and I'm entrepreneurial. I don't like bureaucracy at all. But we have seen changes when in this country we brought in the gender pay gap reporting.
Yes.
And I don't know whether you've come across that. And that has made it's embarrassing. And you can justify it for all sorts of reasons. Women don't do these jobs or whatever, but why don't they do these jobs? People are really challenging this. I think we need reporting from larger organizations of how many people they employ each year. The 3 R's, I call it: recruitment, retention, and redundancy by age. And I would have it right across, but in decades, and particularly go 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Why not? And I think some of that by reporting by age, and you've got nobody over, say, 60, and it will begin to look odd as time goes on. I don't think this is a quick fix at all, but I think we've got to do some things, and I can't find easy ways around this. I really can't, because it's such a big culture change. I don't know how we've got to where we are about age. And I think I've said to you before that I used to think it was people themselves kind of not being very energized, or not learning, or not seeming, being their own worst enemy, if you like. But there's I've seen too much now. There's a real culture issue here around age. It's horrendous. And how do you change that overnight? I don't know. And it doesn't make sense economically for anybody.
No, and it's not like it snuck up on us. I mean, we've seen from the early 70s the demographic divide that's occurred, and how not just with baby boomers or sort of the folks that are like the pocket of folks that would swell as they age, and the Gen X's and millennials not as many, et cetera. But it's not as though this has been a surprise. It's that all of a sudden now it seems like it's a surprise.
I know. I remember doing stuff with my old PR business. It would have been in the 90s. And there was a big shock, the demographic projections. We work in the government, local government sort of bodies, if you like.
Yeah.
And these big reports came out about sort of the aging population. And it's always discussed as being a problem, the aging population. It's never discussed as an opportunity.
Yeah.
And that perhaps is a big change that the government could start doing, by talking about the opportunities that it brings, rather than constantly, oh my God, we're aging, what a ghastly thing. Instead of looking for where are the benefits of that? How do we use this to our strengths?
Well, there are only so many great case studies and exemplars like Victoria Tomlinson. So how do we get more victorious? What does the individual need to be thinking about in their 50s or their 60s? Because you have an exemplary story of having this wonderful career in very different spaces. And then you're just like, well, bollocks, I'm turning 63. I'm going to start a new chapter here in this space of helping folks with their next up, if you will. So tell me a bit more about how the individual should be looking at their next step, next up place in this career of theirs.
What's interesting, Dan, is I don't really hold myself out as any big deal or whatever, but
I do. I do.
well, no. I have become the only word is an influencer on LinkedIn, not in a kind of TikTok millions or anything, but in a couple of 100,000 responding to things. And what's interesting, a BBC radio journalist rang me last year. I don't remember what about, but she said, you're having a big impact with what you're posting because you're changed. You said you've changed my view about retirement. I just hadn't thought about it. I was
Mm.
just going to retire at whatever age. And she said, now I'm questioning that. Why? What do I want to do? And starting to think. So I think the more that people, my generation tends to be more private, a bit more discreet. They don't go out. My husband thinks what I do is horrendous. He's a lawyer, so clearly he's in that very private space.
Yeah.
You would want a lawyer, and he thinks what I'm doing. I mean, he's published a book, and I've suggested all sorts of things for him to get the book out there, and it's all too horrendous. No, I want to keep it private. So it's very amusing. Not, but people don't want to be out there. So I think people have got to get over themselves. And please, if you are ambitious, I was at a party last week, and friends now around me are also sort of 70s aging, and somebody I know for ages, I sort of asked him, what have you been, what are you up to? He said, I'm doing a degree in history of art. I said, oh, is that a passion of yours, or do you collect or whatever? And he said, no. And it was just clear he's just doing it because he can't think what else to do. And he grabbed me at the end of the evening and he said, I love the sound of your business. Can I get involved? And I think it's a real need. And I've just written a blog on this. And, what's interesting is he's got the resources behind him. He's got the skills. If he sees a need, why hasn't he done something about it? And again, I was just talking about this at lunchtime with Sandy. And she said, yeah, but people get to the point, they go, I can't be, excuse the phrase, I can't be asked. I kind of, I've done that. I've done the corporate. I'm exhausted. Why should I? So I think there's something here about if you want to be energized, if you want to enjoy these next 10 or 20 years of your life, do some of the things that are still a bit challenging. And she said to me, most people don't really, you have employees, you've got to pay them, you've got to get the money and you've got to get the business. It's quite hard work, all of this. And I guess it is, but I've been an entrepreneur for 35 years, so it's just kind of in my
Old
DNA.
hat. Yeah, old hat.
Yeah. But, it is quite hard. But don't kind of go for the easy options. Don't sleep in. Don't kind of just potter around. If you want to do something, I mean, I call it with the workshop, I say, some of you, why don't you shoot for the stars? If you really want to do something, you can. The people, our generation have been lucky with their pensions, with their housing, with all sorts of things. They have the resources. If you're still fit and healthy, why not use all of that to go and fill some of these needs? And they don't have to be big deal things, but you can find things in your community, go and make a difference, own something and do it and tell the story, because until we get more people saying it's okay not to retire, that's the bit that I'm seeing. People feel a bit embarrassed to say. Do you know, one of the people who just reminded me, one of the people that led me to start Next Up. So I still had the PR business.
Yeah.
I'd been in Dubai, and somebody I met said, I know somebody in my town, Harrogate, and she's just moved there to be with her parents. She doesn't know anybody. And could you have a coffee and introduce her, because I'm networked? And I had a coffee, and she said, I've written to the council to offer to help with, she was an exec head, head of a business school. And she said, offering my skills for free. And I've written to a charity and offered help. And that's not the way to do it. If you just get a letter on your desk saying, I'm X, Y, you don't know who they are. And I said, you need to use coffees. You need to go and meet people and get them to introduce you, which she was doing by then. But she said, suddenly in passing, she said, I always had this idea for a business. I said, well, what happened to it? She said, well, I'm 60 next year. And she said, all my friends are retiring. And I said, why should you? And she said, well, because everybody else, and could see the wheels in her head. And do you know what? Our coffee turned into a lunch. We planned, she already had a name for this business. She knew exactly what to do. She knew she didn't need help with sort of setting up a company or anything. She knew all that to do. And she'd launched that business that afternoon, and she's still going. I think it must now be, well, yeah, she was a bit older. It's going to be 11 years older, 11 years ago now. And that was I saw one or two people like that. And she was holding herself back. She thought, because my friends are retiring, I've got to as well. She's feisty. I don't know why she thought she had to do what her friends did. And it doesn't take much. It was literally a button switch in her head. Why don't you start? And she's off. So I think we need to do more of this. Lots of people are bubbling with things that they would like to do. It needs barely a sort of a little go on, do it to make them go ahead.
You're creating ripples, Victoria. It reminds me, one of my mentors is very well. I'm name dropping now, but he's a very famous management thinker. His name is Henry Mintzberg, McGill University, and so I get to catch up with him a couple times a year. So just about 3 weeks ago in Montreal, we have a lunch, and and he's just turned 85. And he's as spry and as sharp and as just knowledgeable as ever, writing his probably 88th book kind of thing. And so we get on the topic of demographics and this book that I've about to put out to the world. And he looks at me and he says, "Oh, Dan, you are talking about hope and opportunity. This is exactly what we need more of," which is why I play that back to you, because you just provided 11 years ago hope and opportunity. Yes. Yeah. And he said,
"Oh, I should remember that. I should share your book, Hope and Opportunity." I'm writing it down now. I love that.
Well, I'm just thinking, like, I'm 30 years his younger. But and then he said, "You know what? You've got a very long runway still to go. You'll never catch up to me."
Exactly. So am I. Look, I've got another 15 years where I'm even his age.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
people like, say, I guess he's known fairly well across the world. Someone like David Attenborough.
Yes. Oh,
93, 94 now. Can you imagine if you had him in your business? Would you be going, "Oh, we've got that old codger in the corner"? You'd be going, "No, how amazing." I want to ask him, how did he get his first films? Where's he going next? What does he see the future looking like? You'd want to go and get everything that he's got in his head for your business, wouldn't you? And
it would
our
indeed.
queen
Yeah.
died at what she was, I think she's about 94.
Yeah.
If you had her and her experience to draw on, and those are people that we know, there are versions of that in ordinary people everywhere across the world. We really ought to be drawing on that experience with younger people. I don't want this all to be about old people.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the whole mix of intergeneration, and that's what we need. And to be challenged. You mentioned about women in Leeds Digital, Wild Digital. They're very challenging. They're very kind to include me. But I don't always agree with what they're doing. I find it quite hard to understand why they're doing some things, but it's absolutely brilliant. And you become old if you don't mix up and get your headspace changing. This is the way the world's going now. We've got to change as well.
Spot on, Victoria. This has been such a delight. I can't wait to catch up again with you on this program. Victoria Tomlinson, founder and chief executive of Next Up. Where can we find more about you and your wonderful organization?
Well, I am, of course, on LinkedIn because I'm seen as a bit of a whatever on there. And our business is next-up.com. So I would love anybody to contact me to know that, if we have conversations, if we can change the world between us, I am always up for conversation. You're doing brilliantly, Dan, and I want to stay in touch with you as well, please.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm following in the vapor trails of what you've already been doing, the wonderfulness of that. Thank you so much, Victoria. Again, look forward to our next show. Hopefully seeing you across the pond, face to face one of these days. And for folks that have watched or listened to this episode with Victoria Tomlinson, please do check her out on LinkedIn. And the organization of course, is called Next Up, next-up.com. Thanks for listening or watching. See you next time.